Let me begin with a couple of commercials, and then I'll see if you have some questions, and then we'll dig into another kind of exercise. So first is, so people have asked me about some of these books that I've written. The first book I wrote was called Questioning Evangelism. A lot of what I shared this first hour has a lot of that thinking. The publisher just reissued it as a third edition. We updated a bunch of things, added a chapter about science, and so that's the book that people seem to know the best. I did write a book then about witnessing to family members. It's called Bringing the Gospel Home. It does not answer all of your questions about family, but it does talk about some of the difficulties related to that whole difficult task of witnessing to non-Christian spouses, brothers and sisters, kids, parents, etc. And then I wrote a couple of more books all about evangelism. Most recently, there was a book called Mere Evangelism, what we can learn from C.S. Lewis about evangelism. I was very excited to do that because, as Steve mentioned, I now serve with the C.S. Lewis Institute. Let me do a little commercial about them. It's not about C.S. Lewis. It's about discipleship. We're doing it's a year-long discipleship program and then a whole lot of special events to help people think as deeply about the Christian faith and the rest of life the way C.S. Lewis thought deeply. So that's the C.S. Lewis Institute. And then there's a new book coming out in February, and Steve is handing out some promo material about it. And on this promo material, you can use a QR code and get a free copy of the ebook. So this is a book that's not coming out till February, but I think you can get the ebook now. Please don't download it now while I'm speaking, because then you'll be distracted, and I'll be my self-esteem won't be able to handle that. So, but I finally convinced a publisher, Chris Crossway, to let me write a book for both believers and non-believers. And so that's what this book is. It's called Questioning Faith. And it's about, I tell a whole lot of stories of people who come to faith, but I tell a whole lot of stories of people who walked away from faith or people who don't believe. And I compare their stories, and I try to make the arguments for a seeker, a questioner, of here's how you might consider this. So just to give you a taste, one of the chapters is about that we're not blank slates. We all approach the topic about faith and God and religion with a whole mix of motives. It's not just intellectual. We have all sorts of motives that cause us to wonder about these things. So we just be honest about that. And I tell two stories that intertwine. I tell the story about Christopher Hitchens, maybe you know that name, pretty famous atheist, and how he had all of these intellectual arguments against God. But when you studied and found out a little bit about Christopher Hitchens' life, you saw there was a tremendous amount of emotional pain, especially about his mother and how she died. And so his story isn't just logic and intellect. There's a whole lot of emotion and social issues involved. And then I tell a story about a young man who was raised in a Christian home and became an atheist because he listened to Christopher Hitchens. And then he really got into Christopher Hitchens and started reading him and became sort of a disciple of Christopher Hitchens, and then got disappointed with Christopher Hitchens because Hitchens wasn't consistent in his answers. And that prompted him to re-examine the Christian faith, and he became a Christian. So he says that Christopher Hitchens converted him twice. Converted him to atheism and then converted him to Christianity. He even wrote a letter to Christopher Hitchens and thanked him for his conversion. Hitchens never wrote back, but so anyway, so that's this new book coming out, Questioning Faith. I will tell you, if you do the QR code and get the ebook, the publisher wants you to fill out a questionnaire, and I don't think it's very elaborate, but they, so in other words, there's no free lunch or no free book, so it's a little bit, but, and obviously they would hope that you might do a little promoting through your social network, media, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's all the commercials. Was I supposed to do more? I think that was the commercials. So let me see if you have some questions so far on what I talked about. Oh, we're going to use the microphone. Don't drop that. It's expensive.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
So if you have a question, raise your hand. You do have to ask it on the microphone, though, so I'll bring it to you. I'll start here because she's closest, and I'll go this way.
Thank you. Here we are in the South, known as the Bible Belt. I was born and raised in Gainesville, and I find myself often, how do you witness to a culture that thinks it's Christian?
Mm-hmm.
You're not dealing with atheists and all that, but you know these people haven't, you know. So I know you can start with TUVWXYZ, right? But they know all those answers. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Thank you for asking it. All right, so let me first say that when we are talking to atheists or non-believers or people who know that they're not Christians, they know it, then what we're trying to find is common ground. We're trying to find out what they are interested in, what they love, and if it's things that you also love, that you can have discussions about those things and use them as pointers to something bigger. So for me, very often it's music. I find someone who loves music. I love music too. Who do you like to listen to? What composers are your favorite? And I try to talk about beauty, and sometimes I talk about art. And why is it that those things make us feel like there's something more? So with non-believers, you're trying to find common ground. Okay. With people who think that they're believers or they were raised in a Christian culture and they think they know all that, you want to find uncommon ground. And what I mean is, you want to point out how the gospel is different than religion. How the gospel is different than the Christianity they think they already believe in. And that the gospel is a shocking message that is so very different than just go to church, be a good person, which is what I think a lot of people think Christianity is. Cultural Christianity is be a good person and you'll go to heaven. And so you want to try to find ways to articulate how you found that the real message of Christianity is so different than what people think is Christianity. And you want to have those conversations. And they're very uncomfortable conversations. And you need to be careful that you don't sound like I'm better than you because I came to understand something that's better than you. But it's more like you're trying to say, I started looking at what Jesus said or what people have said, and, it's really a lot different than just this. So, again, a whole series of conversations, but what you're trying to point out is how the gospel is different than religion.
Oh, I mentioned this before. I get hung up trying to face the need for a blood sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a pretty awkward or unusual topic. It certainly is very strange in most people's thinking. And for Christians, we hear it so much that we just kind of assume it or we take it for granted. So what we need to do is try to step out a little bit of it and acknowledge that this is really kind of different. This is weird. Why did Jesus have to die? So if that's a difficult issue for you, I think that's important to acknowledge. I think this is kind of difficult to understand, but I can't seem to get away from it. Jesus did die, and he talked a whole lot about his death. He predicted it. He predicted his resurrection. So what we need to wrestle with is why would Jesus say that it was necessary for him to die? And where we want to eventually get in our conversations is nothing short of that would really solve the problem. I mean, what alternative is there? Well, Jesus taught some good lessons, and none of us could do those lessons. Jesus gave us an example. We couldn't follow it. So what we need to realize God said, nobody can solve this problem, so I myself will. And I will come down as the second person of the Trinity, and I will provide what only I can provide. But it is a difficult concept. Where I want to encourage you, though, is as soon as possible in the process, you want to try to encourage people to read some of the Gospels. I find that the Gospels do explaining for us in ways that we can't do otherwise. And the Scriptures cut through to places where our arguments fall short. So I want to encourage people to read the Gospels. By the way, let me do another commercial. maybe you already know about this, but there's this great program called Christianity Explored. Do you know about this? Have you done this? It's an 8-week evangelistic program of looking at the Gospel of Mark. And the way it works, it was fashioned after the Alpha program. Do you know about Alpha? This started in England. And what it is you invite people to a series of 8 dinners. They come together, they sit around small tables with maybe 6 to 8 people at a table. They watch a video presentation, they discuss it in a group, and it moves them along in the gospel. Now, the Alpha program just kind of went after a number of different topics. Another big church in London, All Saints, All Souls, Langham Place, where John Stott was the minister, said, why don't we build this around the Bible? So they came up with Christianity Explored that looks at the Gospel of Mark. And in 8 weeks, they talk about who was Jesus, why did he die. So you watch a video, same kind of format. You watch a video, you eat dinner, you discuss it as a group, you get into conversations one-on-one, and you allow the power of the Scriptures to cut through. So there's a whole lot of things like, why did Jesus have to die? Why a blood sacrifice? How does Jesus fulfill prophecy? How is Christianity different from other religions? And the Scriptures do things that we can't do because it's God's Word. So, easier said than done, but that's the approach I would encourage. Yes?
I have 2 questions. Both of them are related to Jewish evangelism. My first question is, do you have any difference to your approach when you evangelize or witness to religious Jews?
You want to tell me the second question so I can maybe weave the answers together?
Sure. The second question...
He said answering a question with a question. It's obnoxious, wasn't it? Yeah, sorry.
The second question is a challenge that I find a lot in witnessing to my Orthodox friends, which is kind of related to, you mentioned people will ask, so do you believe that everyone who does not believe in Jesus goes to hell? The question I get amongst my Orthodox friends is much more challenging, which is, do you believe all the Jews that died in the Holocaust are going to hell because they didn't believe in Jesus? And that's always a much more like, I'm afraid to even say a single word after that, So those are my 2 questions.
All right. So the second one just ramps up the emotional difficulty to warp 9 billion. I do wonder how sincere the question is or how manipulative it is, but let me back up and do another commercial. So when authors talk about their own books, I realize it can sound really obnoxious, so I'm acknowledging that. But if you work hard on writing a book and a publisher is willing to publish it, you think, gee, maybe God wants to use this. So I did write a book called Engaging with Jewish People. It's really short. And it's part of a series of books that the Good Book Company published. So they have Engaging with Muslims, Engaging with Atheists, Engaging with Hindus. They're expanding it, and I got the privilege of being part of it. So I have a whole book on witnessing to Jewish people, engaging with Jewish people, and I'd like to do a presentation now which should just take about 12 hours. So I hope you're comfortable. No, just kidding. So I think your question is, do you approach Jewish people differently? Well, yes, most certainly. As I think we need to approach Muslim people differently and atheists differently. We need to learn those dynamics. With Jewish people, I want to eventually get to ask them how much they know about Jesus, which is very uncomfortable. But that's the crux. That's the important thing. And you want to encourage them to find out for themselves firsthand what this guy really said. And that's very, very difficult, but that's where you want to keep pushing it gently, of course, because Jesus made claims about himself to be fulfillment of the Hebrew Scriptures. And again, we want to allow the Scriptures to do the heavy lifting for us. Jewish evangelism is never easy. But my friends who are with Jews for Jesus and Chosen People Ministries and other works are saying Jewish people are more open now than seemingly ever. So don't shy away from it. Just step in with fear and trembling. I think a lot of asking of questions and a lot of if you can know people's stories of Jewish people coming to faith and tell those stories. There's a whole website with, I don't know, dozens, maybe hundreds of Jewish people's testimonies. It's called ifoundshalom.com. Just have people watch those stories. They're all short 5-minute videos of people coming to faith. What do you say about the people who died in the Holocaust? Boy, that's just, I think I would want to just acknowledge just how terribly painful that whole topic is. And that I don't know what those people thought. We do know that there have been some people who survived the Holocaust, survived concentration camps, and have come to faith in Jesus. There's a couple of books and a couple of those testimonies on I Found Shalom. There's a beautiful story by a woman named Vera Schlamm, and it's her story. She survived a concentration camp and then read the New Testament, became a Christian, which, I mean, if anything explodes your mind, because a lot of Jewish people think Germany was a Christian nation, and look what the horrible things that they did. This woman somehow thought, oh, the Nazis were not Christians. Don't put them in the same camp. And the truth about Jesus is still so compelling and so self-authenticating that it breaks through. But so I don't know. I would try to steer away. I wouldn't try to skirt the question, but I would ask, is that a real question? And then I might put them on the defensive. Well, do you think that all of those people who died in the Holocaust were righteous people who deserve to go to heaven? I mean, I would think some of them probably were not righteous people. The fact that they died in the Holocaust, does that earn them a place? That doesn't sound like what the scriptures teach. I would allow the question to be as messy and as complex as it is and not give a simplistic answer. I don't know if that was, I hope that's helpful. There are some great things that have been written about how we talk about the Holocaust as Christians. If you really want to dig into it, the guy who's written the most is a guy named Barry Leventhal. I think he did a whole doctoral dissertation about the Holocaust and how we can talk about it. So.
Maybe we could do one more and then get to the next session.
Yes.
I was curious if, through your work, your ministry, you've ever encountered a situation where a partner in ministry or someone that is, brother, sister in Christ that is also passionate about evangelism has a very different conviction in terms of methodology or means by which to share the gospel. Some of the steps that you've taken to maintain fellowship and still come alongside that person even if you have, different convictions on methodology or means.
Have I ever come across it? Yes. Is it difficult and awkward? Depends on how strong the disagreement is, obviously. My guess is that since you're asking this question, it's difficult for you and you're thinking of a specific situation. So on one level, you want to try to find out, well, here's what we do still agree on. And I'm hoping you do still agree on people need to hear the gospel, and the gospel is still very, very good news. And then I think we need to somehow try to allow, I don't know if I can resolve all of these differences or these difficulties, but we agree here, so I want to try to be as supportive as I can. That may draw some lines of, we may not become members of the same church, or we may not be involved in ministry together. So I think it's thinking, a lot of people have made this kind of diagram or distinction that there's these core things that we believe as believers that we must believe. Jesus really was God. Jesus really died on the cross. His death was sufficient. The scriptures are God's word. I mean, there are these core non-negotiables, primary issues. Then there are some secondary issues that are important, but they're not salvation issues. So Do we believe that babies can be baptized or only believers? Do we celebrate? Do we use these kinds of? Well, no, that's different. Do we believe the same thing about the end times? Do we believe that Jesus is going to come? Okay, that's a secondary issue. And then there's these third level issues, just style of worship, style of music, style of evangelism. And so we can agree with we need to agree with people here. If we disagree with people on these issues, well, again, we probably won't be in the same local church with them, but we still love what they're doing, and we want to pray for God to bless them and use them. And it is kind of tricky, and it's never comfortable, but
Thanks.
that's helpful. Okay, so session number 2. I want to expand a little bit on how people come to faith and how that shapes our evangelism. And then we're going to do a little bit of a listening exercise. So I'm giving you warning. I'm going to have you talk to each other. Some of you just think, great, he's going to stop talking and I get to start talking? This is wonderful. Others of you are thinking, I didn't come for this. So may the Lord work in all of us, and we're going to lock the doors. You can't leave, haha. I did a study, a research project. In fact, in some ways, I'm still doing the research project, but I did a kind of a structured research project. It became a dissertation. It became a book. I wanted to hear how people are actually coming to faith. So I interviewed 40 people who had become Christians within the last 2 years. And I came up with 4 conclusions that I think shape the way we think about evangelism. By the way, just a little thing about method. I met with people and I talked to them for 45 minutes to an hour. I told them, I got their names from campus ministers, and I was only going to interview students, college students, so I wanted campus ministers with Campus Crusade and InterVarsity and church-based ministries, a number of different ministries. Can you give me some names of people who have become Christians in the last 2 years? And then I contacted these people and I said, I want to talk to you, but it'll be a lengthy interview. It'll be at least 45 minutes, but it'll be no more than an hour, okay? So I talked to people to hear their stories. And there's a whole lot behind this, but things started coming out at around the 35-minute mark that just deepened the story. And it was really beautiful. It was things that people didn't even realize or they didn't remember. Which is why researchers like to do short-form surveys and these long-form interviews. They want to do both. But on the short-form surveys on the computer, click, click, yes, no, certain things come out, and that's very, very helpful. But there's certain things that come out after people have been talking for a while. And it was really beautiful for me to hear people say things like, oh, wait a minute, I just remembered something. You know, what I just told you, I now remember... my uncle said something like that 10 years before. I had forgotten that. People start pulling things together. So all that's to say is if you can get involved with people so that you have some longer conversations, they may start talking themselves into things. They may start realizing things. They may start remembering things that are really significant. So I want to encourage you for that. All right, so I'm going to answer the question, so how are people coming to faith? 4 ways. The first one I've already said, and that is people are coming gradually. People come gradually, incrementally. It takes time. For me, from that time when I was walking home from synagogue until I came to faith was at least 4 years. That's very common today. More and more people are moving along gradually, incrementally. There's this one friend that I got to know 5 years ago. He said, I have some questions. We've been meeting every month via Zoom, and we've read several books together. He still hasn't come to faith, but he's moving along. I'd like him to move a little quicker, but that's my problem. So we just need to know that. We need to have the expectation. People come to faith gradually. Second thing, people come to faith communally. Here's what I mean. They hear the gospel from a whole bunch of different people. I'm not using the word communally to say that they come as a group. I'm not saying that. I'm saying people interact with the gospel through a whole lot of different spokespersons. They hear it from a good friend. They go with their friend to church and they hear a sermon. They go online to a website that answers their questions. They read a book. They get to know people who are different than them. They hear it from a whole range of people. And so you want to try to remember, you and the person you're talking to, you're not the only two players in this drama. By the way, you need to also remember that God is involved in this drama, and he's doing the supernatural work. But you want to point people to other people and other stories, and you want to find resources online where people answer questions better than you could ever answer them. It used to be, I know this is really strange for some of you, but there was a time before the internet. I'm just kidding. No, there really was. You could look it up on the internet. You Google it, you'll find out. When did Al Gore invent the internet? And you could see. So there was a time when you would go to apologetics conferences and you learn answers to questions so that when someone asked you a question, you would say, aha, I know the answer. Well, we still need to do that, but there's a whole lot more where you say, you ought to check out this one website because that guy answers the question 1,000,000 times better than I can. Or you ought to hear this person's testimony, and here's a website to them. So you want to involve as many people as possible and as many different resources. And you want to help people see that it's not just people exactly like you who believe this. You want to show them, and that's the beauty of the body of Christ. That's the power of inviting people to come to church. I interviewed this one young woman. She was African American, and she was invited by a friend. She was not a Christian. She was invited by a friend to her church, and she came in and she saw that there were both African Americans and white Americans, and people from other countries, and people from such a wide range of ages, people younger than her, people older than her, and that was the key thing that moved her out of unbelief, to see, wait a minute, black people and white people, old people and young people, married people and single people believe this stuff, and they really believe it, and it shapes their life, and it changes the way they raise their kids, and so we want to think communally as much as possible. Thirdly, people come to faith variously. And here's what I mean. People come to faith from a lot of different starting points, and they latch on to different aspects of the gospel. For some people, they feel guilty, and they know they need forgiveness. And so it's the forgiveness part of the gospel that draws them in. For some people, they don't necessarily feel guilty, but they feel shame. That's different than guilt. And they hear a message that God loves them and draws them to himself and adopts people into his family. By the way, I know some of you right now are very nervous because it's like, are you backing off on the forgiveness aspect, the blood sacrifice, the propitiation of the gospel? No, not at all. And that is the core of the gospel message that we must not get away from. And in fact, if you do a history of the Christian church, it's when churches stopped believing or stopped preaching about propitiation, the need for a sacrifice, that's when they went off the rails. And 100 years ago in the 1920s, when denominations were abandoning belief in propitiation, that's when they went liberal and started denying all sorts of things. So I'm not backing away from that. That is the core that people have to eventually get to. But what I find is that there's a whole lot of people who don't start there. And if I can try to build this up a little bit more, do a study sometime about all of the different words used in the New Testament as aspects of the gospel. Yes, there's the message of propitiation, forgiveness of sins, atonement. But there's also words like redemption, which is more like an economic term of being bought out of slavery and brought into freedom. There's a word like reconciliation, two participants who once were close, who got alienated from each other, have been brought back together. there's adoption, there's regeneration. There's all sorts of words about the gospel, and people latch on in different places. So you want to listen and you want to find out from people what are the issues on in their life, and then you want to try to hold up the gospel as a multifaceted diamond and talk about all these different aspects of things. You could also do a study of how the gospel writers and the preachers of the gospel in the book of Acts appealed to their audiences. You have Acts 17, where Paul gets up and makes this lengthy speech on Mars Hill in Athens, and he's basically trying to say this gospel message makes sense of the world. And you need a big picture understanding of how the world works and how we all worship. He began by saying, I see that you're very religious, which must have been insulting to them, by the way, as Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. But he was trying to say to them, we all worship. That's why he said, one of your own poets has said, we are his offspring. He quoted their poets. He quoted, in our day, we need to quote songs and movies. And no, we don't have to go see all of the movies, but we need to know what people are watching and know. But why are people so drawn to superhero movies, Marvel heroes? Why is that? I mean, they're amazingly popular. I don't know if you've heard that. That was supposed to be funny. It wasn't. Okay, it's all right. People are drawn to stories of a hero who sets people free, or who rescues, or who solves a problem that people couldn't solve on their own. They're drawn to the idea that there are these supernatural beings who are kind of like us, but different from us, who come in and save our world. Does this sound familiar? I mean, I think it's pointing to another story. So people come for various different motivations from various different starting points. Does that make sense? I can't quite tell if you're following. Here, let me give a story as an illustration, but I have to save my voice. I said I interviewed all of these college students and heard their stories about how they came to faith. Here's one woman's story. She said she didn't grow up with any religion. She didn't grow up with any kind of faith. They didn't go to church. When she was in high school, her guidance counselor told her that she should really get involved in extracurricular activities because she didn't quite have the grades alone to get into the colleges she wanted to go to. But if she had an application with a lot of activities, that would boost her chances for getting in. So she joined every club she could think of. She was a cheerleader. She joined the chess club. She joined this. She joined this. I mean, she was on everything. And it worked. She got into her very first choice of college. And then she went away to college. And she started thinking about the fact that, well, she's only going to be here 4 years, and then she's going to have to put together a CV, a resume to get a job. She should probably get involved in things, extracurricular activities. And again, she just got involved in all of these things. I mean, so many different clubs. She told me she even joined the underwater hockey team. I can't even quite, I don't know, where do you watch that from? I don't, anyway, okay, underwater hockey. I guess things move more slow. I don't know. Anyway, so, all right. So she joined all these clubs, and then a friend of hers invited her to come to a Christian group on campus. And she thought, well, that would probably look good on her resume. Sure, I'll go. And she went, and she just thought, this is the weirdest thing in the world. These people sing for a very long time. They close their eyes. They raise their hands. It's like, this is just weird. And some guy got up and talked for a long time, and she didn't remember what he talked about, which is so encouraging to me as a speaker. I was thinking I might have been the guy at that. No, anyway, but so she didn't remember. All she remembers from that night, it was really weird. But at the end of the evening, somebody got up to make an announcement about something, about joining a Bible study. And they were going to pass around a sign-up sheet where you could sign up to join and become a member of a Bible study. And she wasn't really interested in the Bible study, but what she remembers was the person who got up and made the announcement began by reading a verse from the Bible. And it was that verse where Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And all she heard was the word rest. And she thought, rest? There's rest in Jesus? I hope so, because I'm exhausted. I'm killing myself with all of these activities. Okay, so she goes to this Bible study, and they start reading one of the Gospels, and she starts hearing, and she learns about a kind of rest that's so much deeper than what she had originally signed on for. And she became a Christian and realized that there's supernatural rest, not just rest from a million activities, but rest from trying to perform to be good enough, which is what she had built her whole life on. And as she's telling me this story, she said to me, and then I told my mother, and my mother was kind of intrigued, and my mother started asking questions, and I've been talking to my mother, and please pray for her. I think she's close. And she had mentioned her mother a number of times in this 45-minute, 50-minute conversation. And then I said, well, you've mentioned your mother a number of times about how your mother responded. What did your father think about all of this? And all of a sudden, her whole demeanor changed, and she looked down, and she got softer in volume and much less energetic in her speech. And she said, "Oh, I don't really know my father that much. He left when I think I was only like 5, and he tried to stay connected with me and my sister, but then." She said, I probably haven't heard from him in the last 3 years or more. And I thought, oh my, no wonder you're trying to perform. No wonder you're trying to build a resume. How deep is that pain? And so when she heard that there was rest in the gospel, that's what drew her in. People come to faith variously because our gospel message is a multifaceted message, because we're multifaceted creatures. And God created us not just to know Him personally, but to be connected to a community, to worship the only thing that's worth worshiping, God Himself. And we just need to be so immersed in thinking deeply and multifacetedly about the gospel so that we can talk about it from a number of different vantage points. Gradually, communally, variously, finally, supernaturally. There was always, in most of these stories, there was an element of, like, you're kidding me, right? Like, that really worked? Like people came to faith against all odds, against just crazy stories. And it just reminded me that God draws people against all odds. And so it's possible for us to watch what's going on in the world and to hear reports and to read studies, and here's what most people believe. And we could get really discouraged to think, I don't think anybody's going to come to faith. It seems to me like we have so many cultural tidal waves working against it. And yet God works, and He draws people. So we need to reach out to people. Here's one of my favorite stories. I got together with this young woman. And again, the way I started these interviews, I just said to people, well, just tell me how you became a Christian. Take as long as you want. I had a list of 15 questions that I wanted to get to. And I found that most people answered at least 7 or 8 of them just in the way they told their story. And then I would ask the questions they hadn't answered yet. So most people took, 5 to 10 minutes or so. One woman took a minute. I had to draw out a few more details. But this one woman that I was talking to, she took 20 minutes. And her story was every parent's nightmare, every parent of a teenage girl's nightmare. It was drugs and sex and hooking up with this guy and a married guy and a much older guy. And oh, my goodness. I mean, all before the age of 17. And she would just tell me, like, okay. And then she said, so one day I'm standing outside in my backyard and I'm smoking my cigarette because my mother wouldn't let me smoke inside the house. And I'm smoking my cigarette and my next door neighbor comes out and asks me if I want to be in a Bible study. And I said, wait, hold it. Okay, wait. So, like, how did she ask you if you wanted to be in a Bible study? And she just looked at me with this, well, duh face that said, would you like to come to a Bible study? Write that down. Would you? Okay, I like the wording. That was good. I said, okay, all right. But that's not where she started, right? I mean, didn't she make small talk first? Hi, how you doing? How's your day? How's your cigarette? Something? No. The first thing she said was, would you like to come to a Bible study? Think, okay, but this is probably like a neighbor you already knew, you had a relationship with, because I'd heard all these stories about relationship, and I thought, that's the way it always has to happen. No, this total stranger practically comes out. She said, I'd seen her, she was my neighbor. I'd seen her. I might have even waved at her, but I'd never talked to her before. The first words I ever heard her say were, would you like to come to a Bible study? And I said, but, okay, so, but like she was probably like close to your age, right? She goes, oh, no, she was way older. She was like 25. Whew, wow, that's old. I said, okay, so this old lady comes out and invites you to her senior citizens Bible study. What did you say? And she said, I would love to come. Again, by the way, this is not the way you're supposed to do interviewing. I interrupt, say, did you really use the word love? Did you say I would love to go? She said, yes, I said the word love. Why did you say you would love to come to a Bible study? She said, because I'd been reading the Bible for the last year and a half on my own. I couldn't make any sense out of it. So you're reading the Bible while you're doing the drugs and yeah. Why were you reading the Bible? Well, all these guys I was hooking up with were a bunch of jerks, and I figured that's not working. I'm not going to find a man. Maybe God could help me. And then she said, well, actually, that's not really how I started. I started reading the Bible so I could prove that it was wrong, because I had these friends who were talking to me, and I wanted to prove them that they were idiots. So I started reading it to prove them wrong, and I found, oh, maybe there's something here. But that kind of drew me in. But I didn't quite know how to pull it all together, so I started going to this Bible study with these old ladies. And less than a month later, she came to faith. I just think, really, that worked? Would you like to come to a total stranger with like someone smoking a cigarette? Yeah. So you just never know. I mean, if your church decided to do a Christianity Explored thing or some kind of Bible study or whatever, you might say to your next, and you might think, oh, I don't know if this is going to work. I mean, they might be, the president of the local atheist society, but would you like to come to a Bible study? And they might say, oh, I've been trying to read the Bible my whole life. I can't figure it out. Sure. Maybe, because God works supernaturally. Let me tell one more story. This is also one. I would come home from these interviews, and I just was so excited about them. I cried during several of them. I cried when I told my wife some of these stories. I thought, people need to hear these stories. I mean, it was just marvelous. But so here's one of them. I changed all of the people's names when I wrote up these stories, but I call this guy Lawrence, and I titled this story, I wrote this up in a book called Unlikely Converts, and this was the story of Lawrence and the pigs. So Lawrence, again, I had a pretty high likelihood that these people really were Christians, because I got their name from campus ministers. And in fact, they were. There were one or two that I thought, oh, I'm not so sure, but these were solid stories. But they would start telling their stories, and I'm thinking, I know how this story ends, and it has a happy ending. But at this point, if I was betting money, I don't think this is going to work. And so Lawrence's story was, he grew up with no religion. He grew up in a part of the country where there was a lot of religion. It was a small town down in the south. And his mother used to go to Bible studies, but he just thought it was stupid. And he didn't want anything to do with it. He was really, really smart. He introduced himself to me that he was a double major. He was at a very, very good university with a full scholarship. This is a really bright guy. And so when there was a program in his dorm where some guy was going to come speak, and it was advertised as, come with your challenging questions. Ask someone any question you have about God and faith and religion. So he decided to go to make fun of the guy who was speaking and to make fun of the Christians and to show them how stupid their religion was. And they also said there'd be pizza, so he came for that. And so he went to the thing, and what he told me early on, he says, what I remember was I was really mean. I was really just mean to the people that were there, and they were so nice to me. Anyway, so this guy gets up and he speaks, and he spoke for about 10 or 15 minutes, And then he opened it up for questions. He says, so I raised my hand, and my question was, what about aliens? And the speaker said, well, what about them? He says, well, I mean, what if there are aliens? What if there are aliens on other planets? Doesn't it like mess up your whole Christianity thing? And now, I love what the speaker said. The speaker could have said, no, that doesn't mess it up. Here, why? Sit down. No, that might be what I would say. Here's what the guy said. He said, I don't really know much about aliens. I'm sorry, I probably can't help you on that one. I haven't really read much about aliens. I just don't know. I mean, if there is life on other planets, that's probably not too big of a problem for God, and maybe he has different revelation for them. I just don't know. I don't know anything about aliens. I'm sorry. But you know, we do have a book that was written for our planet. It's called the Bible, and I didn't think that would get... See, now earlier I cracked something that I thought was funny, and they didn't work with them on that. Okay, so this whole event was to promote an event that was starting the next week, an 8-week study of the Gospel of Mark. It was the Christianity Explored course for college students, and said, I think you ought to go. I think you ought to like it. So this guy goes, and he goes every single week. And again, he told me when I first started going, I just wanted to show them how bad their religion was. So I just asked I interrupted, and I gave the guy a hard time who was leading it, who was another student. He says, again, I was just really mean, and they were just so patient and nice with me. And he says, but over time, it just started making more and more sense to me. And Jesus was so much bigger and better than what I thought. And I don't know, at some point, I just felt like, I met with the guy who was leading, and he asked me if I had any questions. And I said no, and I said, and he said, well, so what do you believe now? He said, I just started telling him what I believe now, and the more I talked, the more I thought, this sounds like what Christians believe. And that's what the guy said to him. He said, it sounds like you already are a Christian. He goes, I think you're right. He'd kind of become a Christian just gradually, through this Bible study. So he's telling me this story, and I said to him, okay, all right, so what were the big obstacles for you? What were like the hurdles that you had to get over? And I'm thinking something about evolution or something about science, because he was a biology major and really, really smart. And I said, were there any kind of obstacles that you had? And he said, no, not really. Well, yeah, wait, there's one. There was one week, when we looked at that story about, where Jesus cast the demons out into the pigs. Remember that? He cast the demons into these pigs, and the pigs go running off the cliff. He said, what's up with that? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I just, what did Jesus have against pigs? And I'm thinking, really? This is the big issue for you? I mean, even if I wasn't Jewish, I'm not so sure I have sympathy for the pigs. I'm like, really? This is what's holding you back? I didn't say that. I said, well, did you ask this question, to the guy leading? He goes, yeah, I did. And what did he say? He said, well, the first thing he said was, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I went, oh, that's a bad way to start. He goes, no, that was the perfect way to start. He said, I needed to hear him say, I don't know. Because I just thought Christians were a bunch of know-it-alls, and they always have these, simplistic, trite little answers. So when he started with, I don't know, and he took my question seriously, I thought, okay, wait a minute. And then he thought a little bit, and he says, well, I guess the thing about that story is we should probably take it seriously what the Bible and what Jesus said about demons. We should probably stay away from them. They're probably pretty bad. And I guess the other thing about this story is there must be something very different between being a pig and being a person. I said, did that satisfy you? Was that satisfying as your answer? And he goes, well, yeah, actually it was. He says, now, you got to understand, I grew up in an environment where I asked a lot of questions, and Christians always told me to stop asking questions. Stop with all your questions. If you just believe in Jesus as your Lord and Savior, He'll take away all your questions. You won't have any questions anymore. And I just thought, well, that's a religion for stupid people. I don't want to believe any of that nonsense. So I just thought that that's what it was. But when this guy had a thoughtful answer, and took my question seriously, I thought, oh, I should probably dig into this some more. I said, so did you just start asking him a million questions? He says, no, I didn't need to. I figured, well, there probably are some good answers to my questions, and I'll get to them eventually, but it just changed the whole way that I thought about this whole issue. So that conversation I had with him was about almost 2 years after he became a Christian, which was almost, I don't know, like another several months when he started this whole thing. So, okay, so it's, a 2-year process, let's say. I decided to write up this story, and I sent it to him by email, and I said, I want to make sure that I'm telling your story accurately. Tell me if there's any changes, and if you'd be willing to get together, I'd like to buy you lunch, and I'd like to ask you some more questions about this. Sure. Okay. So he tweaked a few places that I needed to change, but nothing major. We got together, and by this time now, it's 5 years after his conversion. And we met together, and he had by now graduated. He got a really good job. I told you he's really bright. And we're meeting, and he said, I've been thinking a whole lot about that, like that conversation we had about Jesus and the pigs and all that. So I've been trying to think about this, and I think I came to realize something only in the last year, just the last year of my life. I realized why I was drawn to that story. He said, it wasn't about the pigs. It was about the man. So what do you mean? He said, remember the man? He was in chains. He was cutting himself. He was doing all sorts of crazy things. He said, I was drawn to that story because of the man, not because of the pigs. He said, I was that guy. I mean, I wasn't literally in chains, but I was doing stuff to myself that was as bad as cutting and being in chains. I was drawn to that story because of the man getting set free, not about the pigs. He said, I didn't realize that until just about the last year. Now, isn't that amazing? It wasn't just the question. The question was, what about the pigs? What's up with that? No, it was the question behind the question of, is it okay for me to ask questions? Does your religion have answers for my questions? So it wasn't just the question, it was the question behind the question, but actually it was a much bigger thing behind that. It was what was going on a level so deep that even he didn't realize it. That's how powerful God's word is. That's how powerful the gospel is. It penetrates to places that we don't even know about, that we don't know about as the Christian talking to them, and they may not even know about it. But God's word cuts through because it's a two-edged sword. God's truth penetrates because that's what we were created for. So I want to encourage you to step into conversations, even if it feels like, I don't think this is going to work, because there's a supernatural God who does the absolutely miraculous work of raising people from the dead. That's how evangelism is done, is God uses our efforts, as flawed and as unconfident as we may be, because our confidence is not in our confidence. Our confidence is in the truth and the power of the message. Lord, would you work and draw people? I don't know how this is going to work. So that's how people come to faith, gradually, communally, variously, supernaturally. It's wonderful. Here, wait, let me tell one more story. I like telling stories. You okay about that? Most of you, it appears, are still awake, so this is good. So here's another story. Again, I get together with this young woman. By the way, I did talk to men and women. In fact, my committee that was overseeing the research said it's got to be 50-50, so okay. I'm just remembering some stories about women. So this is a woman who grew up in a home with no religion. Her parents were atheists. She told me early on in this conversation that her grandfather was a pastor. But her father became an atheist when he went off to college, rebelled against his father's faith, married another non-believer, raised her and her sister in a non-religious home. She goes off to college, first year in college. She said it was just sort of like a typical first year of college. You know, I studied, I got good grades, but I also had a lot of fun. There was lots of different parties and stuff. I came home after my freshman year, and my parents said, hey, we're going to take a family vacation. Your sister just graduated from high school. This may be the last chance for us to do a family vacation. We're going to go to London for 2 weeks. And so she said, so I was packing, and I packed my Bible. I said, wait, hold it, excuse me. Your what? My Bible. You packed your Bible for a 2-week vacation in London. Yes. Why? She goes, I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? I mean, she said that phrase, I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? Like 3 or 4 times. It's like, you packed your, wait a minute, where did you get a Bible? She goes, yeah, it's weird, I don't know, I don't know. I thought, did your grandfather give you a Bible? No, my dad wouldn't allow that. There's no way in the world. It's like, so where did you get a Bible? I don't know. And you packed it in your suitcase. Yeah, why? I don't know. I just did. And then she went out of her way to say, and my dad said we had to pack light. We had, size suitcase. You could only take so much. She said, and it was one of those big fat Bibles, like big fat. I was giving up room in my suitcase for my big fat Bible. I'm thinking, this is crazy. And then I said, so did you read it? She goes, oh yeah, every day. On vacation? Yes. Every day. Yeah. What did you read? Well, I read the Gospels. I read the Psalms. I really liked them. I read Romans. I didn't really understand that much. I read Revelation. I didn't understand that at all. Like you read this every day. Yes. Okay, then what? Well, then I got back to school and I thought, I need to find people who read the Bible and can help me understand it. And then I saw a poster in my dorm advertising. There was a Young Life Club, and they were going to be doing an event, and the event was titled something like, Why Believe the Bible? So she goes, and the speaker gives 4 reasons why you should believe the Bible. And you could probably guess it was things like, well, we have archaeological evidence that proves the validity, and they point to Jesus, and here's arguments for his resurrection, and something probably about messianic prophecy. And then she said, and his 4th reason was that when people get mad and they curse, they use the name of Jesus. Say, what? When they stub their toe, they don't say, oh, Buddha. Like, okay, I've been to a lot of apologetics workshops. I've never heard that. You're giving people 4 reasons, and that's one of the 4. I'm thinking, this shouldn't work. Who is this guy? I need to talk to his supervisor. This is one of the reasons you should believe the Bible. Okay, so, what did you think? She said, oh, I thought it was fascinating. So I went back to my room, and I looked up this guy on Facebook, and I stalked him. That was the word she used. I stalked him, and I sent him a Facebook message that said, I have to talk to you about your message. He very wisely sent one of his female staff to go meet with her and said, would you like to study the Bible together? And they did. They started meeting every single week. And it took a semester, but she came to faith. And at the end of my interviews, I had this one final question, and it was always this. It was, okay, we've been talking for almost an hour. This is great. If you just had to narrow it down, what were the 3 most important factors in your coming to faith? And she said, it was bringing my Bible on vacation, yeah, and it was going to hear that guy who gave the talk about 4 reasons why you should read the Bible. And then she paused and she said, and then I guess I'd have to say my grandfather. I said, wait a minute. You mentioned your grandfather, but you really haven't said anything about him. Did he talk to you about this stuff? No, never. My dad wouldn't allow that. I said, well, so why is he one of only 3 major factors? And again, she said, I don't know. I just think, I don't know, just knowing that he believed what he believed and that he was my grandfather, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but I think somehow he was involved. And I thought, you bet he was. Way to go, Grandpa, praying your knees off for your granddaughter. Right? Isn't that beautiful? So one of the most important factors in her coming to faith was something that she couldn't quite put her finger on it, and it wasn't involved, and that's the way God works. Isn't it beautiful? Okay, so we need a workshop. You're thinking, really? See, I told you I was going to have you talk to each other. So I think one of the core, basic, essential ingredients of good evangelism is good conversation. And we all need to grow in our ability to have good conversations. Even those of us who are great at it, we all still need to expand and grow. So what I want to do before we break for lunch is do some practice in conversation.